Looks like everything's backwards. And I don't think that's the case when I stream on YouTube alone. And I interrupted so that we could encompass more channels, but now it looks like we kind of, I don't know. It's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. It's like, okay, at least we're live here, but I'm going to have to learn how to write backwards. And I think that's actually something that the Crowley system talks about, learning how to think and speak backwards, which figures prominently in all the symbolism. Let me go ahead and open up chat. What's up, John Francis? Thank you for joining. I tried to live stream earlier from the edge over here where those gnarly cottonwoods are. I'm getting used to the mosquitoes. Like, I don't like them, but they're making me alert. Like, I can sense them. But they're relentless. And they're trying to force their proboscises like through my pants. I'm going to have to put on my COVID protective suit. What's up, Junders Plunkett? So what you see on the screen is backward, and I'll work on that. As I said, it's a restream thing, because with YouTube, it doesn't do that. I'm like, well, I could flip the camera around and aim it towards the whiteboard. The problem with that is I cannot then see the chat. It gets a little acrobatic. I'm trying to look on both sides of the screen. It's just not going to work. No big deal. Mainly what we were talking about is a continuation from something we were starting. I consider these to be rough drafts when it comes to the history benders concept. And we were talking about Robert De Niro, Joker, Batman, Luigi Mangione, and Daniel Penny, and these various characters on the world stage who are mirrored in the entertainment world. And specifically, we were talking about the Batman Joker stuff, which is intriguing when you look at how the Batman characterization was attached to the Daniel Penny character, the vigilante to the right, villain to the left, and how the Joker-esque aspect of Luigi is pretty obvious. And then we were noticing this anti-CEO rhetoric that really kicked up after The Madness came out, but it was sparked by Luigi. And that's kind of a Joker-esque element as well, but we're noting the symbolism of the green hair of the Joker, Luigi with his green hoodie, and the character with the green beret, and how it was a green beret who bombed Trump Tower in a Cybertruck. So referencing, obviously, Trump and Musk. And they've been the subject of these No Kings protests. So No Kings, the Joker theme of Kill the Rich, it's all tied into these movies and these world stage fake events. So it's class warfare thing. And so we were just discussing this in light of the Trump throwing a lavish ball, remodeling the Lincoln bathroom, meanwhile cutting off Snap. It's like, no, this is obviously, it's an engineer outrage. But the title of tonight's live stream, we were also getting to Mel Gibson. That's another one. So Mel Gibson and Jim Caviezel, and how his work has lent itself to what we would term the meta script, especially with his involvement in the Q thing on the periphery. Like, Jim Caviezel is a big Q pusher and always has been, like deep Q, like adrenochrome level stuff. And his movie was played at, I think it was at Bedminster. And so Trump was there front row watching the movie Sound of Freedom, which I saw in the theater. And if you didn't follow that story, the movie's not that great, but it's about Tim Ballard, who, by the way, is like a real life human trafficker, LARPing as somebody opposing human trafficking. I think he's been credibly accused of that. And I think he was also feigning like he was related to some prominent Mormon founder. But anyway, Jim Caviezel and Mel Gibson are close because of the whole Passion of the Christ thing. And then Mel Gibson is attached to conspiracy theories. as in like the movie Conspiracy Theory, but the Q people thought of him as a white hat, and he played the role. If you follow this whole thing, and a lot of the like Sylvester Stallone too, they throw hand signs, dog whistles. Like there's a reason why people fell into that whole cult. They were following breadcrumbs. Nothing organic about it. But the significance here we brought up was Mel Gibson, 9/11 references in The Patriot. Mel Gibson has been consistently, I think, okay, Braveheart. We were discussing Braveheart in this context and how it was reflected in the Butler, Pennsylvania psyop. If you look at the PR stunt that was done basically on top of the body of the dead firefighter, like, somebody's dead and they're just up there posing for the cameras. But the shot with the flag behind him, combined with his Truth Social avatar, there was a lot of Braveheart stuff that I called out. I said, it looks like they modeled this shot off of the cover of Mel Gibson's Braveheart. And sure enough, when he goes back to Butler 84 days after the event, the New York Post has a headline calling him Braveheart. Like, how weird is that? But the association is impossible to miss if you put the two side by side. And we've done this quite a few times. I have a deep dive on the subject. And so I don't think it's far-fetched to think that the white shirt with the word freedom could have been a nod to Braveheart. As in, as far as like these two events being analogously fake. And perhaps, I don't know, I mean, maybe Mel Gibson, I don't know. Who's the Kubrick of the day? Who directed this JFK? Because Kubrick shot JFK. It wasn't Lee Harvey Oswald. And there's a really good backstory to Oswald, Riley's Coffee, and NASA that kind of suggests that he got into the reality faking department of government. But instead of going to the moon, he went to the grassy knoll. Same director. Dark Ghost Wind says the latest scam is creating fake AI footage of people complaining about losing ABT. See, this is right out of Mountainhead. So Mountainhead comes out right before the LA protests, and it was about how generative AI was allowing people to incite violence against other demographics. So if people are creating fake AI footage of Black people complaining about losing ABT, 90% of the people who see it are going to think it's real. If they have a predisposition, a prejudice, it just feeds it. We've already seen this. I've seen it with old footage, decontextualized, re-uploaded. And if enough influencers do it, it looks like an outbreak. It looks like a trend. Like there was a point where the trendy thing for these big right-wing channels was to post videos of violence on subways. And it created this perception that this was like the norm. In every subway car, you're getting accosted in some way. But this led up to Daniel Penny going into Gotham like Batman, a vigilante, as he was characterized, and saving the people from an unarmed, mentally ill guy. And of course, we talked about the significance of Daniel Penny being released as Luigi Mangione goes in, and how it ties into the class war subtext of the Batman Joker, and how these fictional universes overlap with the psyops. So we talk about like individual instances of movies mirroring fake events, but there are entire fictional universes that have merged with certain areas. And the Batman Joker thing has been pretty consistent left and right. Remember when Batman came out, it was March 4th. And I was like, this has got to be some kind of March 4th right-wing terrorist. And that was the subtext. And it got pretty interesting. Like the weapon the Riddler used to kill the mayor was called a Tucker. And this is at the time that Tucker Carlson was being blamed for that racist shooting up the supermarket. And they were like, Tucker sent the shooter. Like the Tucker is just the meme. I saw them starting to demonize him at that point. But March 4th was also the date that Joker Sarnaff, the Boston bomber, had his death penalty reinstated. So I thought that's interesting. Michael Lito says, I've decided to give your newest book as a Christmas gift this year to a select few who think we have a chance at them. Well, if nothing else, they can offer criticisms and refutations. I mean, the reason why it's being published is so people can confront it. And if we're wrong, well, correct us. Save us some time. You know, if somebody could explain what we're looking at here. And I read this article by Armin Ra that he's publishing soon, bouncing off of the hoax indicators. And what, I don't know, we'll see. We'll see how they take it. But I was just going through these hoax indicators and his expansion on it. Makes some very valid points. I'll have to wait till he shares it, though. I don't want to offer any spoilers. But anyway, what we're looking at are hoax indicators. So if you're going to refute what we're putting forth, you actually have to address these things that we raise. And the real problematic thing is that our contention is based on the idea that all entertainment, if it's big, if it's platformed, if it's mainstream, it is compromised. It's being used as a conduit for propaganda, specifically propaganda messaging attached to psychological operations. So in other words, psychological warfare. You know, you can call it a PR stunt, but we're talking about worldview warfare, but it's being disseminated through mainstream entertainment run in these, like, it creates an echo chamber. But when you get into, you know, what's the purpose of the fake events? Well, you're talking about events that become part of our historical narrative, like our history is being tampered with. And the evidence points to long-term planning. And we're specifically referring to the concurrent released stuff because you can't hand wave that away. And one of the most glaring examples right now is The Tempest. Even normies are telling me things about Erica Kirk that I foreshadowed based on Hulu, where the widow is accused of faking her grief and even plotting her husband's death. I mean, we're seeing it all play out on the world stage. Yeah, Reality Witness, the whiteboard text is reversed because I'm on Restream. If I'm on YouTube alone, that's not an issue. Don't know what their thinking is here, but yeah, that is the case. So I could flip it and you could look at the ceiling, or I could face the phone down, but then I wouldn't be able to see the chat. What's up, Northern Girl? So what we have to do then is I'm going to have to write backward, which I'm fine with. So the title of the live stream, I think, was The Great Deconstruction. So what we're really talking about here when we're going into the overlapping directors, associated psyops, and the specific instances of, you know, real-time alignments, we're creating I guess kind of a map here, because the explanations up to this point have always relied on this all being dismissible as coincidence. But you can't really dismiss it as coincidence just because we're, you know, because this is, again, it's not just a matter of opinion, because we're not just talking about entertainment, but also drills. And that was one of the things that Armin Ra brought up, though, was the drills. So one of the main hoax indicators that's often overlooked is real-time mass casualty operations or simulations that happen to overlap with the fake event. And this is a pattern as consistent as predictive and concurrent programming in the entertainment. But the fact that you have both drills and the psyops and the relevant other stuff, that kind of tells you quite a bit. Reality Witness says Tim's Tech Fund. Yeah, actually, at the moment, I'm looking at remote servers to start the 24/7 live stream. So anyway, what we're doing here, though, is we're going event by event, and we're mapping out the relevant programming and seeing if there are any patterns with the directors. And these movies are having, it's revealing, is what I'm going to say. And so we're calling this the Great Deconstruction. And what we want to reveal here, to the best of our ability to discern, is how far back every fake event was planned to be inserted into history. Because I'm suggesting that our history is being proactively created, bent, I mean, obviously real stuff happens, but I'm talking about the stuff that takes the spotlight, that directs narratives, that advances agendas rapidly that would not have been advanced were it not for the event, the dramatic event. I mean, we saw what happened after the CK thing, how quickly Republicans were agreeing to, oh, we got to censor and lock up anybody who said anything mean about Charlie. Like, that was quick. But anyway, I don't think it's controversial. And if you accept the fact that a lot of news is fake, a lot of events are simulated, if you accepted that premise, well, then you've already accepted the premise that they're faking history. So now the discussion is, how far back in advance are they planning things? And if you look at the common denominators in every instance of predictive programming leading up to any major event, it tends to lead back to a year. Snake Eyes being the relevant one for the Charlie Kirk thing. And something just came out. Some supposed TP USA whistleblower talked about some kind of Israeli missile system that somebody who worked for the company or took over, moved into TP USA, was associated with. And I was just like, this is right out of Snake Eyes. But what we found is if you look at all the various things that foreshadowed that event or were running concurrent with it in the theaters or on Hulu, you have the same elements. Tyler, the storm, neck wound in that particular spot, the name Kirk, obviously, and there was something else that was pretty common. The widow thing came up later, though. It wasn't in the original things. But interestingly, in the last week, we've seen Erica Kirk on the world stage being heavily associated with J.D. Vance. And ever since that event, people have been saying, her supporters have been saying, she needs to be VP, VP Kirk. And again, we're just looking at how the actress in Snake Eyes, who's next to Charlie Kirkland when he gets shot in the same spot in the neck, the actress shows up in 2025's Heads of State as VP Kirk. So we're just kind of like not randomly connecting things. This isn't our pattern recognizing monkey brains gone amok. No, we're looking at the systemic fakery and the deliberate foreshadowing or product placement for future fake events. And we're just trying to figure out, well, now we're just debating the degree to which things are planned in advance. Andrea says, I've concluded it's human nature to lie to others for power and resources, so fake news goes back to pre-recorded history. Yeah, I just look at mainstream mass media as essentially the new religion. And it basically is this big tent, and every other worldview can coexist within it, because ultimately it controls the parameters of what is ultimately a subjective fictional universe. I mean, reality is objectively real. However, there are many things that are actually not real or simulated that we accept as real. And this is no different than what religions have always done, God constructs. And we're looking at a very sophisticated version of bread and circuses. But I don't think that what we're talking about is any more complicated than advertising and propaganda. And then people ask, well, why? What's the point? Well, I think a lot of it comes down to the control over history and worldview. That's the basis for, governing. In other words, they put us all in the same Truman Show, and they have a great deal of, I guess, editorial. I'd say just a monopoly. They've got a worldview monopoly. And so if you look at worldview as like religions all have their own specific worldview, the worldview that we all share is the big consensus, but it's really a product of our collectively agreed upon version of history. And so obviously our history is nothing more than news over time, piled up, documented, observed, accepted as real. The problem is you have a certain number of events. I'm not saying everything is fake, but there are these fake events that everything else bounces off of. It contaminates the whole thing, the whole pool of news. So if you look at the extent of fake events and how they have directed things going back, even if we just go back to JFK, like we don't even have to go back that far. If we start with JFK and look at it the way we look at fake events today, from a metascript deconstruction position, you would be able to discern that, okay, we are in a worldview that has been influenced by myths, contemporary myths. And how does this affect things? What does it matter? And that's kind of what we're looking into. That's what we're discussing here. But as far as the objective, ultimately, I think we're talking about some kind of just sophisticated form of mass mind control, just like any cult. And I guess you could call this cult Nassatology. As I said before, it's like Scientology. It's a space religion, has this transcendental version of the future where we're ascending into space, and it's very much like a religious thing, like going to paradise. But it's no different than Scientology fundamentally. Better special effects. Scientology has better actors. Infinite Jack says, "Hey, IPS Pro, I caught that Candace bit which said people who think Charlie's alive just can't believe Erica's lack of grieving. Can you elaborate on the guardrail she's using here?" Yeah, that was good, actually. Now, she didn't dig that deep, and she didn't really entertain the idea, but people have been emailing her en masse, asking her what she thinks about Charlie being alive, which is naive because obviously she knows he's alive. So how is she going to deal with that? And she said the reason why some people think it's fake is because of the way people reacted and her lack of grief. And that's not the reason why we're saying, I mean, that's part of it, but we're saying it because of I guess, I don't know, for me, it was always the squib-like effect, the way the neck was inflating. That really caught my eye for some time, but it has a lot of hoax indicators all around. But the thing is, if you ask the question, is Charlie Kirk still alive? If you just even entertain it hypothetically, like if so, well, then who's in the know? And it unravels the idea that he's a victim of a conspiracy from the Mossad. Because ultimately, that's what she's pushing. That Erica Kirk was working for Israel's interests, and they're taking over TPUSA before he could swing further right. And he was converting to Catholic, and he was going to be like another. So basically, the narrative from her whole perspective has basically been that he is somehow he was taken out because he was becoming inconvenient. He was going to swing farther right. But this is all fake. I mean, as in, this is no different than after the JFK thing. I mean, the JFK assassination created this major like subculture of conspiracy theorists who are all following what I consider to be just the state-approved alternate version. But she's not going to go that much further because she had a dream. If you remember, Candace Owens had a dream that the spirit of Charlie Kirk came to her and said he was betrayed by some people at Turning Point USA. This is all story. And I want to clear up that she's not walking around with a magnifying glass looking for clues when she's like, oh, it was the shooter in the sewer, or it was the guy with the thing on his arm. Like, she's not actually investigating a crime. What she's doing is she's disseminating talking points on a schedule. It's like an alternate reality game. It's basically reality TV with audience participation. Not really though. I mean, you're just more or less cheering it on. I mean, we don't have any real input here. And they do not deal with the implications of what we're saying. Because the implications of Charlie being not dead is that, yeah, obviously he wasn't killed by Antifa. He wasn't killed by Israel, but it implies a deeper conspiracy than just a simple assassination. And then you can point fingers at people who would be directly in the know, including Erica Kirk. So then why is she going through this? I mean, and then why is she up there with Trump? Obviously, that would mean that Trump's in on it as well, because it's not like she's fooling him. So it would be very inconvenient for people to really think deeply about the implications of Charlie Kirk hanging out at Crisis Actor Island today, which is what I think he's doing. If that's his real name. I mean, the script for this new JFK event, I think you could argue was prepared to go into the planning stages in the late 90s because Snake Eyes. And again, when I bring this up, I'm pointing out that what Snake Eyes has, it has more than just what I've referenced, but the common denominators are in all the other examples. I mean, all of them. Obrick says, Candace Owens always seems to keep the story vague and mysterious. Well, I've been pointing out that she's just leading you down some well-paved rabbit trails. There's no new intel. There's no new twist. And it's mainly this way of just asking questions. It's all implications. But I said it on day one. She's basically claiming that Netanyahu did it. They did the same thing with the JFK. And again, this is the state-approved conspiracy theory. But the people who are looking at not Candace Owens, at Erica Kirk are looking at her hugging J.D. Vance, running her fingers through his hair, wearing leather hot pants. And the memes are great. The memes are hilarious. I like the one where she's standing on the coffin and then J.D. Vance is like hugging her and his face is kind of buried. And I'm just thinking, that's actually what it looks like. And normies are relaying this to me, that they think she's a villain. They think she faked it all, that she staged her grief. And as I pointed out before, this is what they say about the widow in The Tempest. And again, Erica Kirk was called the Storm. There's some significant overlaps with Erica Kirk and this TV show that started on 9/10 that I consider to be a significant conundrum for anybody still thinking that these connections are coincidental. What's up, Mango Penguins? Thanks for joining. Infinite Jackson's Find Chuck. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't like to talk about people's looks, but it's possible he was wearing some kind of a, I don't know. I don't care to speculate. But assuming he's a real person, which I think he is, I don't think these are like CGI. I just think you got to look at them as like embedded agents. And I was looking into this term in Russian intelligence communities called legends, which refers to agents or embedded spies who are given fake backstories, fake families, fake jobs, so they can blend in. So how's this any different? We're just looking at crisis actors. So yes, Charlie Kirk's a crisis actor. And so here it is. Legends are the elaborate false identities created for elite Russian spies. They live undercover for years or even decades to infiltrate target countries. They're trained to build completely fabricated lives, enabling them to move freely and gather intelligence while appearing to be ordinary citizens. This technique dates back to the Soviet era and has been adapted by modern Russian intelligence services under Putin, who has refined the creation of sophisticated cover stories using technology and forged documents. Anyway, there's quite a lot here about creating fake people. So what I'm suggesting is that when you're looking at a number of these psyops and the people who are in them, you're looking at people who are to be considered spies, plants, agents. That it's not like a gig, like an actor might get a gig as a crisis actor. No, I think you're looking at people who are more connected. But anyway, I'm suggesting that Charlie Kirk's whole persona was manufactured. And I mean, I don't know how believable you think it is that an 18-year-old is going to get a $1 billion backer to build this organization. And I've said for some time that I've been looking at it kind of suspiciously because of the name and how Turning Point USA would be the platform for the Turner Diaries. And I said that before, And then I saw the 2020 and who was being platformed, and I thought, okay, this is interesting because I'm just looking at the ideas that are funneling through there and what they're actually putting forth. And it's just like a propaganda conduit. And I don't think the association is accidental, because Turning Point is when the leader martyrs himself. And after the martyrdom of the leader, this is the Turner Diaries, this is when the revolution begins from the right, the white Christian uprising. And it involves all the enemies getting nuked. And so I'm referring to the Turner Diaries, which inspired Timothy McVeigh. Infinite Jack says, Charlie's a crisis actor and a death faker. Yeah, I think so too. I think that's a valid conclusion. I mean, I hear some people think that he was really killed. It's like they got to do the sacrifice, they got to do a ritual. And I'm saying, as long as you're stuck behind that bloody guardrail, you're never going to get off the world stage in your perspective. Sophia and Lashiri says, perhaps Bill Hicks was a made-up persona created using a similar face composite to Alex Jones. I don't know. Maybe. I mean, that whole thing is very questionable. It almost seems like a joke, an inside joke, especially if you get into the Kevin Booth connections. So the question is, why? What would be the point? But when you look at Alex Jones, and you could ask, does he look like a 63-year-old? Because that's how old Bill Hicks would be, 64. Because he's only like 50. So I don't know. But as far as him being a manufactured character and a persona, well, yeah. He's real. He's a performance artist. He's a broadcaster. But he has a very specific ideology. And it has certain parameters. And so his worldview is Red Pill. And Red Pill is really just a repackaged J Pill. If you scratch the Red Pill, it's actually a J Pill. And it's woke right. So what they have done is they have mainstreamed the core doctrine of the woke right. They even repackaged it as Q in Pizzagate. I mean, who do you think the deep state is? And the whole adrenochrome thing. That's all just blood libel kind of repackaged. But they created this, they manufactured this whole thing. And he's always been in that universe. And I pointed out too that Trutherville is a subset of the mainstream. It's not like he's a controlled opposition agent. Like, I don't care about these individuals. I'm pointing out now that everybody who has that perspective and operates from that particular paradigm are the controlled opposition. It's not just the big platforms, it's the propaganda mules who repeat the stuff, who propagate the propaganda thinking that they have the real version because it's the alternative. All right, let's see here. Going through your comments. Kaido Smoke and Mirror says, I have a feeling AI has been around since the beginning of the 21st century. What do you think? I really dismissed that idea, and I completely have been pushing back against it. However, there was a book I read called In the Country of the Blind, and it's about this group that create this supercomputer, and it allows them to predict trends and ultimately direct them. So they took over media, and they began directing people and capitalizing off of it. And it's a small group. But anyway, the first thing they did when they seized control of media is they deleted any mention of this computer they had developed. So they wrote it out of the history books. So now we're talking about fake news, a false worldview. Well, what's behind the false worldview? I mean, obviously, if we're looking at misrepresentations, myths, contemporary myths, and then you have the selectivity, what it omits, you have a very, I think, what you could consider to be a very narrow view of things. And it's coming from a very specific perspective. And so behind it, though, what's behind it? Could we, in fact, be in the village? So the village is where the parents decide to let their children grow up in a paradise where there's no violence. So they take them out into this wildlife refuge in the middle of nowhere, no planes fly over, and they live as though they're not even in the 20th century. They're a couple hundred years behind in technology, but they're happy. And they never leave the village because the parents run psyops. They dress up as monsters, run around the woods, kill little animals, keeps everybody in the village. So my point is that could we be living in such a village? And that would explain a lot, to be honest. It would explain a lot as far as the purpose of maintaining people in a simulation for all intents and purposes. And the vision of the elite having the masses within a simulation is a pretty consistent theme. You see it in Westworld, you see it in Hunger Games. A Clash of the Titans has it, and I'm talking about where the elite are gathered around a circle table with a map and they manipulate it and things happen in the world. But anyway, interesting question. It's a hypothetical. Personally, I don't think so. I don't think they would have needed it because I think that everything that we're seeing today is just an iteration of what religion has always done. And I think if you stop separating government from media, religion, and entertainment, it all makes a lot more sense if you just put it together as a monolithic entity. And this monolithic entity, this centralization of worldview, this worldview monopoly, for all intents and purposes, is the new monotheism. So I say, like, from the Metascript perspective, we've got a one world religion already installed. It's the default operating system that we all have. And I've said before that if you want to deconstruct this, you have to approach it as though you were an atheist and you're confronting a theocratic society. I mean, you're a minority. No one's going to believe you. The system has utter faith in the thing. And so there's no point in trying to convert people or convince them. My main interest here is aggregating those who already see what we're talking about as far as media fakery that seems to be systemic, uncorrected, and therefore an influence on our collective worldview. Yeah, Smoke and Mirror says, makes more sense. It's the same religious constructs repackaged. Yeah, I would say aliens are angels for the atheists. Space is the new heaven. I would say COVID's a devil that the atheists will believe in. It's a new concept of sin, virus as sin. And if you go down the line, Noah's Ark, the flood, climate change, you even have Noah that measures our climate and warns us of floods. It's like a template. Even the space program, the idea of ascending into heaven, centered around the rocket, that's just, in many ways, symbolically, it's a repackaged obelisk, which represents the resurrection. And it's, in other words, I look at the space program as pageantry. I don't think they're going to send you to Mars. I think they're going to create a simulation and you're going to say, we should live on Earth as they live on Mars. Look how sustainable it is. No guns, no MAGA hats, no. I mean, basically, it's a utopia they're creating. And I think they're using the Mars project as a hypothetical to get us to live that way here on Earth. There was a talk that Jeff Bezos gave in 2017. It was covered in Wired magazine, where he said that if you want liberty and freedom, you're going to have to go to space because there's going to be what he called a civilization of stasis, a freeze, an authoritarian lockdown because of climate change. So, in other words, they've already had this in the cards, I think. And if you think that Musk is your savior in all this, no, he actually agrees that NFTs are bad for the environment. Like he plays along with all that stuff. So I think, again, Mars is a utopian concept that we're meant to adopt mentally as the ideal, and then we'll start implementing it here. Coyote Smoke and Mirror says, although I should mention, internet was invented in stages. January 1st, 83, often called the official birthday because that's when ARPANET adopted the TCP IP protocol. Well, since 1968, at least, with 2001 Space Odyssey, we had this AI concept of this intelligence that sort of becomes our manager, our babysitter. Like they put that out there a long time ago, but it's been a big part of James Cameron's work with Skynet and Terminator, and then Pandora being sentient and implying that Gaia was sentient and we killed it. And the World Economic Forum has this global AI alliance, Gaia. Gaia, again, a worship of the earth. And I consider Gaia to be a God construct. And if you piss off Gaia, you're going to get flooded. It's really no different than any other flood myth. And even the Noah's flood myth, I think, was based on something even older. Everything just seems to be recycled. And we do see a lot of that. We do see a lot of recycled. Like I would say the CK assassination is a recycled JFK. Even Erica Kirk mirrored something regarding, it was Jackie Kennedy comes out in a blood spattered dress. And she's like, I want people to see what they did. And Erica Kirk said something similar, almost word for word verbatim, regarding posing with the corpse. Kevin Mooring says, you'll eat bugs and love it. Yeah, unfortunately, it's not going to happen because Klaus Schwab stepped down before they could mandate a bug diet. He stepped down the same day as the Pope, 2 88-year-olds, one head of the World Economic Forum, one head of the papacy. I mean, that's kind of significant. They were both 88. We actually have a PSYOP trading card about that. But anyway, so what we're talking about here fundamentally is we want to go through systematically all the major history bending events. So if you're familiar with the Newsbenders 1968 play about how the news was writing the news 5 years in advance, that's what we're talking about. But when you look at the long-term effect, we're talking about history bending. So I want to go through all the history bending events and the contemporaneous entertainment that somehow foreshadowed it. And this is something that is systemic. Like, this is the program. We were talking about John Frankenheimer, the guy who wrote or directed The Manchurian Candidate. He basically created the Oswald character. Well, he drove RFK to the Ambassador Hotel where he could be shot by a mind-controlled assassin. We were talking about mind-controlled assassins the other day, or this idea of it, because of John Hinckley Jr. posing with the picture of Catcher in the Rye. John Hinckley Jr. was inspired to shoot Reagan by who? Robert De Niro as Taxi Driver. So we were noting how interesting it is that Robert De Niro is majorly Trump deranged, and then Trump gets shot. And if you look at De Niro in his various roles, he has played the assassin and the assassinated in this context. And if you connect the dots with the Joker movie where he's shot on TV as Murray Franklin, and you look at the overlap between Joker and Taxi Driver, you can follow this chain, especially when you get to the specifics with Machete and how he's shot while he's talking about illegal immigrants, just like Trump was. So anyway, we were discussing how John Hinckley Jr. had that book, Catcher in the Rye, and it brought up this mind-controlled assassin thing. Just a reoccurring theme, but it came out of Hollywood. But the proximity of this Hollywood director with this theme central to JFK's life, RFK's life, the fact that director was associated with the Kennedys, should raise a few eyebrows. I think it's highly significant. It would be like finding out that Stanley Kubrick was partying with the astronauts. It's like, okay, they're a little too close here. And remember, 2 months before the JFK assassination, Jackie Kennedy made a home movie where JFK gets killed, and they used the Secret Service in it. I saw a couple still shots in that Vanity Fair, but the whole video hasn't been released. But apparently they use Heinz 57 to simulate blood, and he's dead in the foyer. That was on 9/22/1963. Andrea says, I watched a 1951 movie last night when worlds collide about a star crashing into Earth, and they sent a spaceship with people and livestock to its planet. Basically, Don't Look Up from the 50s. Not a new idea. So that's another one, too, is how many of these writers in science fiction turn out to be prophets? Because I would contend here that what they have done is they have used science fiction as our cosmology. In other words, they've used science fiction to condition us for this new paradigm that we're living in, like every aspect of it. It all just comes out of science fiction. Like I'm not a science denier, but there's a point where they can augment things and add things that don't actually exist. Does anybody here believe in space junk? You think there's you think they're actually we're actually seeing stuff like that falling down to the earth? And because I'm looking at these instances of space junk, you got to look. It's like the news people are just so gullible. So Critterfest Sanctuary. Well, one of the best examples I think of what I think was a hoax was the lady in Alabama in the 50s who was hit by a meteorite that went through her roof, bounced off a radio, hit her on the hip. So like the mayor and the police, they're all there, and she's holding this big rock, and she's got this big red spot on her side. It looks like lipstick smeared on her side. It's pretty funny. Let's see here. Immunity Grade says, I view Klaus Schwab, George Soros, Bill Gates as invented enemies. Yeah, I would say so as well, because what you'll find is that the enemies, the billionaire bad guy villains to the right, like the ones you mentioned here, Soros, Gates, Schwab, are heroes to the left. And you got Elon Musk and Trump and I don't know Peter Thiel, but you got these tech billionaires that are worshipped by the right and they're villains to the left. Like Elon Musk is a savior. He's going to take us to Mars. He saved free speech. But to the other side, he's basically some kind of authoritarian who, they turned him into a villain to the left where people are defacing Tesla cars over it. And I think a lot of people really do this. I know that there's some probably fake events like the Green Beret blowing up a Cybertruck. And there's one that went pretty famous, pretty viral. And he was wearing this shirt. He was vandalizing a Cybertruck. And he had a flag with an eagle on it. And it's the same shirt worn by the shooting suspect, or one of the photos of an alleged suspect of the Charlie Kirk thing. Coyote Smoke and Mirror says, a paperback copy of Catcher in the Rye in the back pocket of the Lone Wolf Assassin is now a Hollywood trope. Mel Gibson's character in Conspiracy Theory had a copy. Yeah, I brought it up because I thought if you look at how many times it shows up, we should just consider it to be a hoax indicator. Truth or bait. Like now the main thing, the big trend among mass shooters is to write their manifesto on their weapons and to reference other shooters. That's another big trend as well. They reference each other because they're all in the same fictional universe. These aren't copycats, but they tie the stories together for a reason, and it works. That's what I mean when I say that we live in a simulation, because you have a simulation in your mind, which is your worldview, which is a product of your perceptions, your experiences, your philosophy, and your temperament. All these things come into play. But in addition to your lived experiences, you have these things that are broadcast that you're told to believe that you don't directly experience. And this whole mediation process of all of us being hit with this stuff, it fills us up with things that might not be real. And I think they're tantamount to superstitions. And I think it's by design. They can pretty much create the perception of anything. They never actually have to show it. Kaido says, Elon Musk is a DARPA NASA frontman actor who never invented anything in his life, nor run a corporation at a profit. I saw this article, and I think it was the Daily Beast, where they said that Elon Musk didn't have the security clearance to go backstage at SpaceX, which kind of leaves me open to the possibility that he doesn't know. Like maybe he thinks it's all real and he's like a Truman in a Truman Show. I think that would make sense. I don't think you would want a public persona like that who has I don't know. I mean, everything about him is, I think, is contrived. Like, remember when he did the Nazi salute and the ADL came out to defend him? They're like, oh, he's just exuberant and autistic. Well, I'm sorry, but like, I never knew that autistic people were known for Sig Heil. But he gets a pass. He's an interesting character. We should actually break it down a little bit. We've kind of gone over him a few times, but it's worth pointing out. We have to get a timeline, though. We need to know the year. What was the year that Wernher von Braun put out Mars, A Technical Tale? It's got Wernher von Braun, which is about the Elon, the first colonizer of Mars. I think there's Willy Wonka in him. And that was really apparent when he bought Gene Wilder's house. And he was talking about starting this candy company for his boring company that digs the tunnel. And so anyway, I'm just like looking at these composites. Okay, Tony Stark. Like, I don't think he fits these. But Robert Downey Jr., who played Iron Man, said his inspiration for Tony Stark was Elon Musk. So this is just a composite, the big Frankenstein. And of course, we'll put Iron Man. And I would add also Henry Ford, especially since having bought X. Henry Ford, of course, the Dearborn newspaper, the one where he published the protocols of the elders of Zion. Like, that's definitely a part of him. And I would even add, and it's not so prevalent now, but with his publicly admitted drug use and all the rumors about it, I don't know. I get some Jack Parsons off of him as well. Also, all the explosions. I think there's something there. Side Girl says Elon was forced to bow down to Netanyahu. You know, they killed Netanyahu in the new Superman. Hawk Girl. So they have this character who's obviously based on him, and Hawk Girl is flying, carrying him, and just drops him. Lord Laney says the fact he's named after the Mars, Elon, and Ingersoll Lockwood after Barron Trump should tell any rational person it's a psyop world order. Yeah, precisely. I think all these world leaders are just puppets in a reality TV show. I don't get caught up. Like, what season of The Apprentice are we in? Because it never ended. It didn't end after 13 seasons. They just switched venues because we're basically watching, in many ways, a very influential reality TV show being passed off as real news. I mean, it's bread and circuses, entertainment as a form of government. Does anybody else find the phrase attention economy kind of ominous? It's like, what do you want my attention for? And I think it's also notable, too, that whenever we are engaged in entertainment, we are passively receiving propaganda messaging. It explains a lot. Like, why do I see people having uniform reactions? Well, I think a lot of it is because what they encounter in these staged events are things they've already encountered in the form of fiction, and they've already taken sides with the anti-hero or the hero, but they've already made up their minds. What's up, Rocky USA? Mizell says for the Loosh. Yeah, I haven't ruled that out. I have this kind of theory that the Black Mirror, combined with our focused attention, our so-called Loosh, may actually have some kind of energetic exchange. So I'm talking about soul harvesting en masse. I mean, it's dark. I mean, it's Black Mirror stuff. I'm not saying that's true, but it wouldn't shock me at this point. It may as well be true. All right, let's see. The Great Deconstruction. Okay, now here was the point of today. So we're talking about Mel Gibson, of course, and his background. Jim Caviezel. We kind of already got into that before. I don't want to reiterate it too much, but we're talking about directors and actors who are specifically involved in shaping worldview by their content, which reinforces the prevailing psyop. So, like all these directors who are tapped on the shoulders to do movies about planes flying into buildings, for example, the writers, Tom Clancy, the all the movies that had to be modified because they were so prescient about a 9/11, like Collateral Damage. So, we're talking about here are the names and movies, the directors' names, the movies that have contributed to these psyops, and we're listing them on a timeline, and we're looking at the instances and the common denominators and getting an idea of how far back was this script created and who was it handed to. And I think we can reasonably ascertain this information. We can kind of figure out, okay, this set of ideas or themes is going to be put into these platforms, and it's all target marketing. It's target marketing. So the people who are going to be hit with the psyop have already been fed a steady diet of content that has to do with suggestibility, cognitive bias. Girl says every psyop deployed to advance a narrative that leads to an agenda. Well, yeah, exactly. And so we're talking about influence operations. And one of my main points here is that by looking at the wider media ecosystem and how far back the planning of these things goes based on the product placement, I think we can reasonably say that our history itself, our dominant paradigm, which is a product of our history, our collectively agreed upon version of things, is being performed for our consumption and our belief, but that it's written in advance. Not just a few years, but it would have to be a few years for anything at a minimum. But I'm saying by decades. And so they kind of change. It's a different conversation when you're talking about, this Charlie Kirk's a complete construct and he was fake and it was to advance this agenda. But also, I mean, it goes a little deeper and you say, and it was planned in the 90s. So it just raises a bunch of questions. And then people say, well, then who? And I think that's the wrong question. The question should be what? First, we need to find out what before we can make any sense out of a who. Like, I think that's almost irrelevant. And the problem with that line of thinking is that that's the kind of red herring led conspiracy theorizing that has kept people from looking beyond the world stage. People are like, oh, who's this group? Who's that group? Well, what did they actually do? If the stuff we're unpacking is fake, then what did they really do? How can any group be bad? Like the Jesuits did this, the Illuminati did this country did that. Well, these things are all fake. So what are you actually mad about, bro? Girl says the bombing of Venezuelan boats in international waters may or may not be real, but the agenda is regime change. Yeah, you know how easy something like that would be to fake? I mean, what isn't fakeable at this point? Somebody said to me, what if the whole thing was fake? Not just a squid, but what if the entire event was fake? Now, I would not posit that. I mean, you have a lot to unpack if that's where you're going to start. Like, that's just it's a very difficult thing to maintain. But I mean, if we were at that level where events on that scale could be faked, then there's no hope for us. Then we've already crossed the line a long time ago where, oh, we can no longer tell real from fake. We're in a simulated version of things and there's no way to see outside of it. I mean, at least we started this at a time where you could still see smirking actors, green screen glitches, continuity errors. And they would let things slip like, oh, I thought it was a drill like we had this morning, but they said it was real and it sounded like firecrackers. Like you hear at every fake shooting event, like they're getting better. And I think it's safe to say that the visuals are going to improve to the point where we will not be able to tell an event's fake simply by looking at it. So we have to rely on the extraneous information, what I termed hoax indicators. And hoax indicators are inclusive of drills because we have seen consistently this pattern of drills concurrent with the events that also have predictive programming, which rules out mere coincidence. And this would also pertain to 9/11. Look at all the NRO drills going on that day that all pertained to terror attacks. So looking at it from that perspective, which is drills concurrent with fake events, uh, you can start looking at, okay, well, this event must have been planned back this far, and you can get an idea of the scale of these operations because these operations aren't local hoaxes. The word hoax is too small to encompass it because even the smallest fake event that has casualties, for example, is going to involve police, paramedics, DHS, and mainstream media compliance. We're talking about a conspiracy. Diana Southard says hoax indicators not relying on visuals. Yeah, precisely. Like the visuals aren't going to be a reliable indicator of real or fake in the future because it becomes a matter of opinion. Like, oh, this guy looks fake. Well, that doesn't say anything. Even with the Trump things, it's the Trump Butler, Pennsylvania thing. People are like that. Someone said to me, it looks fake. And I'm like, how can you tell? I mean, it doesn't look fake. That's the problem. But then you start listening to other opinions and perspectives and you get the bigger picture. And there are many things that would indicate the thing was staged. I hear some people just saying obvious things like, you can't get your ear pierced with an AR-15 or even close to it because what it'll do is it would have a bigger, I don't know, some kind of ripple effect. I don't know though. Trump's ear. Someone had this meme. They're like, because the whole Man of Steel, how CK's neck stopped the bullet. They're like, well, his neck was made of the same stuff as Trump's ear, which is what they make passports out of. That was a ludicrous story planted on purpose, by the way. The Superman references were there at the Dairy Queen. We talked about this before, but that whole thing, the miracle thing, is because it's emotional. People believe in miracles. Like, oh yeah, the bullet was stopped by his neck. It's a miracle because it was going to keep going and it wasn't going to stop till everybody was dead. Like, what are you talking about? How's that even a miracle? But they ran with that because it gave the conspiracy theorists room to assert that it therefore must have been a different shooter. It was the second shooter red herring. We watch this thing play out according to template, and templates are hoax indicators. If the event follows a predictable template, just like a previous analogous event or events, then guess what? It's probably a hoax. I don't know if you saw it, but there were actors in front of this event who said, this girl was laughing. It's like she's laughing. She's like, yeah, I saw Charlie Kirk. He got shot in the chest and blood sprayed out and he fell forward. I'm like, so if you're a mainstream news believer, are you going to believe that? Because it's on the news. It's a supposed witness. Although what she's saying bears no resemblance to what happened. They buried that quick. And then you find other footage like the guy who was asking Charlie the question, the ironic question about guns, that guy, before the event, he was rehearsing his response, hands on the head, shake, screaming no. Like he was rehearsing. And there was even a point where you could see somebody being interviewed and typical stuff. They're being coached. I've seen people being coached when they're describing a so-called tragic event where it's tantamount to method acting. Like they're trying well, how did you feel? Like trying to get them into their feels. Yeah, the guy's carrying him off the stage into the waiting car and they just went into any car. One of them was the author and his pastor, that Frank Turek guy, who wrote a couple of books, which were before Turning Point USA, and both the covers, funnily enough, seem to foreshadow the shooting. One of them is like the word God with the bullet hole in the middle, and then the other one is the planet Earth with a trans flag over it with a bullet hole in the middle, and it's all shattered. No ambulance, new EMTs. Who moves the body before verifying the injuries? Yeah, that's what I'm saying. If somebody takes a hunting rifle and shoots me in the spine, I would ask that you just leave me there until the professionals can stabilize my head. Thank you. But they're like, no, let's just throw him like a sack of potatoes into the back seat. Don't worry, there's not going to be any blood. Like, where is the blood? And then what was with the guy who moved the chair? Like, this is a murder scene. You want to know where the shooter's coming from. You move the chair so you can pull an SD card out, and then you run around the corner and you do a selfie video take of your reaction, and you tell everybody Charlie's dead. It's like, what do you mean? You don't know that yet. But he was perfect. That was the guy who posed. I don't know. Like, he was in shock. It just looks so funny. But yeah, he was moving the crime scene around, and then of course there was no crime scene tape. I was a little suspicious when I saw how quickly they went from the shooting to putting him on parade, where JD Vance was like riding the coffin on 9/11, very dramatic, everybody's crying. And I'm like, wait, did you even have time to have the medical examiners, figure out what happened and then send the body to the funeral home to be sewn back together and dressed and then placed in? So the whole thing just went so fast. It's like, that's some pretty quick service out there in Utah. Because I don't know how fast these things generally go. I assume you could rush it, and even if it was real, it's in bad taste, because they necessarily would have had to have rushed it to get that fast service, autopsy to funeral home to display, and then to display the body on 9/11 like they did. I think that was a PR event. Side Girl says they cleaned up the crime scene like it was a movie set. Yeah, so what was it, a crime scene or a movie scene? Also, the hand signs, the second shooter theories, all these alternative theories that explain what might have happened, who really did it, those are intentionally manufactured. So the reason why the event was preceded by one guy touching his hat, the other guy touches his nose, the other guy touches his elbow, you have these agenty looking guys throwing obvious hand signs. That was truther bait. That was put there so that truthers, conspiracy theorists, would say, oh, it's a conspiracy. This was some kind of military psyop to kill him. And they were signaling each other. Right, because the professionals are super obvious on camera, sure. So that was put there, low-hanging fruit, so that you would run with it, and you wouldn't have a starting point of, did he even die? Was he squibbed off the world stage? Diana Southard says, drive-through embalming. Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, embalming just takes a few hours, sure, but it's complicated by the fact that he was shot in that part, because now you're talking about someone who's been, completely opened up. So now you have to sew it back together afterward. And who knows, to embalm the face, you're injecting up through these arteries that might have been damaged. But they were quick. I saw this sign that some No Kings protester was carrying, and it was like, what healed faster, Trump's ear or Erica Kirk's heart? That's funny. Trump's ear was like healed within a couple of days because he had a really big bandage. That probably helped, right? Like, did you see the bandage on his ear? And then all of his followers are out in the audience at the RNC, and it looks like they've got like a diaper on the side of their head, like this massive bandage, because it's like a show of solidarity. And then Trump comes out like Elvis on the comeback tour, the Trump lettering all in like the light bulb font, and he's got this reflection, all dramatic. Great performance, the RNC thing, very dramatic. The end of season 1 of The Sopranos has Tony Soprano with a bandage on his ear because he survived an assassination attempt. Critterfest says, word is Charlie Kirk's wife is Courtney Love's strung out sister from rehab. That's really not the worst I've heard, She's been villainized, but I'm pointing out that she was created as a villain because this perfectly matches the Hulu character. So she's a manufactured villain. I saw this post by Human Vibration, and it was like Erica Kirk next to every Disney villain with the widow's peak. And she pointed out that she has this archetype. And I'm looking at it, I'm like, you know what? She kind of does. Her eyes, the widow's peak thing. And sure enough, though, she has been turned into a villain. Some have said the word Jezebel, which ties into Hurricane Jezebel. Again, this is all just how she's been characterized, and people are buying it. They're running with it. And they're very well aware of the optics. So hugging J.D. Vance tightly, saying, you couldn't replace Charlie Kirk, but J.D. Vance is really good. Like, come on, they know what they're saying. Gematria 101 says, the fact that Trump gave the news of Kirk's death is a mockery, one fake victim confirming another 713 lie. Yeah, they're all acting within the same fictional universe. And we also have to consider, too, that if Butler was fake, then why would you have a starting point that this one might be real? It would actually be a continuity. It'd be like a major change, like the pattern. Like it'd be a major diversion from the pattern of things being fake for suddenly one of these to be real. It'd be a break in this continuity of fake, 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 following fake. Like it never accelerates to real. But anyway, we're talking about how these are world stage characters, Kirk included, Erica Kirk. And the Erica Kirk conundrum is simply the fact that not only have we identified her corresponding predictive programming characters in 3 movies and the music video, so that's pretty significant right there, but that since September 10th, she has continued to walk in the footsteps of her corresponding character in the Hulu movie and now Heads of State with all this VP stuff. So we can add to this. There's plenty of other things we could add to this, but just saying that alone removes the idea of it being coincidence, because she's clearly acting in a role. These events, like having JD Vance at Turning Point USA, when I saw the whole rollout of it, I'm like, okay, this is definitely theater. But the fact that it mirrors so perfectly is just, to me. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, Hulu's The Tempest has the leader of the New Republicans. He's in church. He gets shot in the left side of the neck. He dies. Widow takes over. And she's told to fake her tears on TV to win over the constituents. And she does. Later, she's confronted and they say, real grief is ugly, not dignified. And then the mother of the assassinated really thinks that she likely was behind it and that she came in to his life with this in mind. And I'm like, wait a minute here. The Tempest, and of course they called her the Storm at the memorial. Stephen Miller called her the Storm. You got Hurricane Jezebel. You got the Tempest. Again, I'm just saying here, this character they've created is still in character, and she's still out there acting, and it's matching the entertainment. So PSYOPs matching entertainment can no longer be disregarded as a mere coincidence, thanks to the Erica Kirk conundrum. But we've already moved on. People get stumped, and they're like, I can't figure this out, and they just kind of stop. But we haven't really stopped. We've just continued to make our observations. And I want to point out that we don't make predictions, but you can make some from a model. You can make extrapolations. And if the model involves predictive foreshadowing content and high saturations of it relevant to events that are imminent, then yeah, you could plausibly make some extrapolations. Yeah, I saw a lot of funny memes, but it just reflects how people were viewing this Erica Kirk on stage with JD Vance, and these memes are on point. And I'm saying they're not foolish. They're experts at PR. Look what they've just done. This is one of the major psyops um, of the day. This is a JFK level psyop, and it's a significant thing even now. So they're not slipping up. They're creating this. They're creating this perception because they need the conspiracy theory side of the bifurcated system. They need the alternative and the mainstream need to be in two different directions. Good One Day says, so weird. In old, legitimate, respectable soap operas, no one really cried. Yeah, her crying, I mean, they should have put tear squibs. Like there's got to be some kind of squibs for tears or some kind of filter. Like I'm sure they figured it out. Like they can put a fly on you while you're on live TV. Why can't they add tears? But no, there's no tears. And people are saying you shouldn't be mocking how she grieves. Well, within hours of Charlie's death, she was sending out these automated demands for GoFundMe contributions. It's like, didn't you guys just sell your $5 million mansion 3 months ago? Curtis says, I think it's going to come out that Erica Kirk was involved with Charlie's friend and they both go down for Charlie's murder. Well, what if Cash arrests her? Well, I need to continue to watch the rest of that Hulu show to know what's going to happen. Maybe look at Heads of State. I don't think she's going anywhere. I think she might actually be around, and Turning Point USA is under her control. And she may, because Turning Point USA is credited by Trump with providing the street game for his reelection. So it seems to me that she might be poised to be VP Kirk, just like her corresponding movie character. I think that's what I mean. Is that a prediction? Well, we're looking at the script as it's been portrayed. So yeah, it's somewhat reasonable. But I'm not making hard predictions because these things can be. We're not making guesses on what's really going to happen. Our guesses are predicated on what's going to happen next in the scripted soap opera. But it's a great story so far. I mean, if you look at the traction it's getting, and Candace Owens is publicly spiraling and melting down, but she doesn't really believe what she's saying. I think we have to keep in mind that she's an insider to all of this, and that her role is to serve as a rallying point for all the conspiracies about Kirk. I think she's bigger than Alex Jones in this regard. I don't think he's even a voice in this. And he's Red Pill. And again, Red Pill is just essentially a repackaged J Pill. So they'll say globalist, they'll say George Soros, but it doesn't take very long to figure out what they really mean. But they're just packaging things in such a way that they have a broader audience. But the idea that Charlie was killed by her, or she was part of it, has been brought up since the beginning of this thing, since her first appearance, and people questioning her grief. Was it real? Which means that she was likely, I mean, look, we saw evidence of Duper's Delight, and she's cried at every appearance. I mean, at this point, it's just performative. And then I see people like Matt Walsh, and he's like, all you liberal leftists are mocking the widow's grief. Because there's this Halloween costume, which is hilarious, of the grieving widow. And, he's outraged about it. And he's like, I'm not a liberal. I'm not on the left. Like, honestly, I'm an alien anthropologist. I'm a film critic. This is Mystery Science Theater, 3000. And we're watching it, critically. And we're just critiquing the performances. And that performance is, I would say, purposefully bad. I mean, I really think that if she wanted to really cry, she could have. That wouldn't be difficult. But I think what we saw was, a message. It was delivered to both sides. Conscious Reality CD says she's definitely an actor. I think she even had a role in a reality TV show. So if you can do reality TV, you can do fake news. What's the difference? I mean, fake news is news with fakery involved. Reality TV is reality with the little fakery involved. Critterfest says maybe she'll come out with a Bitcoin called Squibcoin. I'm on the fence with Candace, yet believe her. Uh, okay, if you're on the fence about Candace Owens, you should know that her proximity to Kirk, her proximity to all the psyops. I mean, January 6th, her husband with Parler. She's too deep into the mix, and she's adhering to all the predictable narrative templates for you to think that she's an authentic individual who has opinions and she's searching for facts to share with us. I think it's safe to say that she is deploying engineered narratives on a schedule, that she's telling a story, getting you involved, but it's essentially like role playing games. She's like the dungeon master. She's the one who's disseminating the story. You react, the story moves forward, but the story precedes it all. And so you're engaging with an actress. And I'd also point out that anyone who doesn't acknowledge media fakery is automatically, I would say, compromised, whether it's just philosophically, psychoepistemology, they just never figured out fake news, they didn't care, or she's an insider to psyops and is very well aware. But I think she has no plausible deniability, in my opinion. But again, if they don't notice media fakery, and if they haven't really extrapolated the significance of Trump faking his head wound, and firemen not really being dead, if they haven't gone there, then they're not a source for anything, because their point of view invalidates anything they have to say about media, about world events. She's far from off-world stage. And off-world stagers are a growing body of voices that you see on X that are unavoidable, where even she has to address it. Some people think he's not dead because of how people are acting. Well, no, we have a lot of reasons. Like we think we're looking at this in the context of Butler being fake, of many events being fake. So we're not looking at the thing as anomalous, and it fit every template. It fit every expected hoax indicator has been here, and it has one of the most, I think, clear examples of concurrently released content on a #1 film that we've ever seen. Like, this is really something. This Hulu thing is huge, but so are the other ones. But you'll notice the mass media focused on Snake Eyes. This is one of their tactics. They'll focus on the furthest one back, nothing real time. They will not focus on it because it's easy for people to dismiss stuff that's far in the past. They can, just say, oh, it must just be coincidence, or there's so many movies. Of course, you could just cherry pick it. But if you're talking about something released on the day or within 24 hours or at the same time, yeah, it's a different story. Like we were talking about the Louvre and the crown jewels being stolen, taking place during the No Kings protests. So there's one box to check. Okay, this is a little synchronized. Then it's also on Netflix in a show called Lupus. And this show has a character stealing Marie Antoinette's necklace. And of course, she lost her head during a No Kings protest. So you can kind of see how the movie, the real event, and the activism were all presenting the same theme. Good One Day says they're getting better at developing characters somewhat. Yeah, I would like to think that they're improving. They're certainly not like dropping hints on purpose. The fact that we notice stuff at all, the things that we notice seem obvious to us because we've been looking. But some people say, well, maybe they're trying to give it away. Maybe they're just telling us. Maybe they're dropping hints. And I'm saying, no, I think they're just drawing from a very small talent pool. The Government Actors Guild, the GAGs, are probably there because of security clearances and family connections, more so than because of acting abilities. And that would explain quite a lot. All right, let's see. I'm going through your comments. Conscious Reality says, like how Barbie has multiple jobs and storylines, she reminds me of the dream wife in life. Oh, the Barbie. She's also kind of a bobblehead like that. Barbie movie kind of reminds me of both her characters. I'll have to think about that. We're talking about Erica Kirk. She's been pretty much treated like an actress, and some people think it's ominous, nefarious. Critterfest says, haha, you're a film critic. That's a great mind. I love it. Well, yeah, if we're looking at the world stage as such, and we're specifically honing in on the events that are staged, simulated, the reality TV events, the propaganda events that are misdescribed as news. If we're looking at these, criticizing them, and discussing their influence on wider society, how are we not film critics? Like, what we're doing is more philosophy and film criticism than political rhetoric. Like, we should never be censored for what we're doing here. The great deconstruction, reverse engineering events that we suggest are fake. Like, this isn't like thought crimes. We're not engaging in dangerous misinformation. We could be wrong. I mean, I guess. I'm waiting for something to expose how these coincidences continue to happen. But even if we were wrong, the connections are real. So that is still intriguing because it suggests that we're somehow engaged in some kind of collective storytelling that has cohesion. I think they try to downplay Candace Owens and this whole concept of media deconstruction by saying Candace Owens is just connecting dots. She's got apophenia and she's a functional schizophrenic. And this is what they've always done. The tinfoil hat. So the idea of the tinfoil hat, that the person who doesn't believe the news is a conspiracy theorist, that's the thing that came in the wake of the JFK assassination. So it makes perfect sense that they're rebooting that whole archetype with the CK event, because they've created this massive pool of conspiracy theorists, and they're creating a lot of outrage because of the fact they're mocking the grief of Erica Kirk. Louis Bell says, I had no idea CK was such a political celebrity. Well, if you weren't paying attention to the podcast sphere or any of these characters or MAGA and its emergence, you might have missed him. I was familiar with him. I knew him from the talk circuits because he would come through town, but I never really got into him necessarily. I didn't watch a lot of his debates because I think what they do, and a lot of them do this, it's like Steven Crowder, change my mind. I think with this one, it was prove me wrong, but they're going to an audience that they are basically trying to trigger for content. Kevin Mooring says, I saw Q-Slop today saying Erica. Okay, so J.D. Vance is JFK Jr. and Erica Kirk is his wife. That's crazy. Who isn't JFK Jr.? I think John Stossel, Jesse Waters, Vincent Fuchsia, -48. Then there's that random guy with the green MAGA hat who's been to every MAGA rally. Brickman, Donald Trump himself in a costume. So far, that's 7. There's at least 7 people who have been positively identified as JFK Jr. If you missed that, if you missed the whole Q cult, it was getting pretty culty at the end, where you had hundreds of people waiting at the grassy knoll for JFK to come back on the anniversary of his death. Like, I come back from the dead after getting my head shot. I'm not returning to the place where it happened. And he didn't show up, and they were super disappointed. But they were led there by these very shady people who were, now here's what they would do. They wouldn't say, hey, I'm JFK Jr., and then get all the groupies. What they would do is there would be rumors spread, and they would never deny it. And if you pressed them on it, they would leave. So there was this guy, okay, 107. His name was 107. And they said it's John O. Saving because he's saving our souls. I'm telling you, it's culty. I looked into it. So 107 was identified by his cowboy boots. He would have his cowboy boots. He would have his phone. He would live stream. And he would talk about his military connections and Trump, 5G chess, and how the deep state was getting it, and how JFK Jr. was going to come back and execute Hillary Clinton. So there's this whole fantasy built up around JFK Jr. coming back and saving the world from the deep state. Well, anyway, one day 107 drops his phone while he's live streaming, and you see him. So he looked really cool, and he had gravitas when he was just boots in a gravelly cowboy voice, saying these things and using this terminology. You could see where he got a following. But when he dropped his camera and you see the guy and his face, the unflattering angle, and you're like, okay, this guy is so far from JFK Jr. He just had an instant like falling off. But he was another fraud who led people to believe he was JFK Jr. Then you got Pastor Bob Joyce, who pretends to be Elvis, and he just got married. So he got married to this like 30-something woman, and I'm like, does she know that her husband's actually like 95? But he never says, I'm not Elvis, but he let people believe he was Elvis. So I started haranguing him on X, and I'm like, well, say you're not Elvis, say you're not Elvis. Eventually, I got him to say, I'm not saying that I'm Elvis. But he didn't deny that he's Elvis. They're frustrating because they know what they're doing. And then his best friend is Eugene Ho, who ran for mayor in Florida in 2020. He's a big Q guy. And he has people convinced that he's Bruce Lee. So you got Bruce Lee and Elvis hanging out, doing conferences, selling JFK Jr.'s magazine. Only now they're targeting the youth. So it's like George Jr., and it's teaching girls how to be trad wives and how to sew flags, and then the boys to become Boy Scouts. It's really insane. It's a huge cult. I'm glad it's gone, although there's a few, but I don't think these things are organic anyway. I think it was largely bot driven. And when the psyop's over, no one's getting paid. It just disappears. And I know this from experience because around 2020, Q was peaking. And I took all the Q drops and I put them into a PDF and I sold it on Teespring for $5. And I made more than $200 just by spamming it on Twitter because there are so many people who wanted that content. So if you look at the Q source, it's this idea of the oral tradition of the Gospels before they were written down. So they took this idea and they said that Q is actually essentially the second coming, but he's speaking to us through these Q postings. So if you go a little deeper into their lore, it turns out that JFK was the second coming and they capped him, but that his son is the third coming. So now you can see why they're obsessed with JFK Jr. They said JFK Jr. is literally the blood of Christ, and that he's undercover until he can rise to power in the shadows of Donald Trump, who has been helping him since the 90s. So now you see Trump as the front man for the return of Jesus. Like, that's where they got with this thing. And then you have that mixed martial arts guy. What's his name? What's the mixed martial arts guy? The one with the blonde bowl cut. He just denounced Trump. He says Trump is the Antichrist. So this guy was a big QAnoner, pro insurrection. Bryce Mitchell. UFC fighter Bryce Mitchell referred to Donald Trump as the Antichrist. And for his evidence, he said that, and this was the guy who originally said he would take a bullet for Trump. He's calling him the Antichrist because he says that it's Revelations 13 that Trump survived a miraculous head wound, and everybody's calling it a miracle. And remember, they did tie it to Ephesians 6:11 about stand firm against the snares of the devil and spiritual wickedness in high places. And so armor of God to protect you from the devil, and the armor of God protected him, as evidenced by the fact that the bullet was at 6:11. Yeah, so Vincent Fuchsia looks like a hobo. He's like 5'4". Looks like, I mean, when I say hobo, I just mean he's got perpetual stubble, a hobo hat, hobo glasses, hobo clothes, and he was running around claiming to be JFK Jr. And they said his name, Vincent Fuchsia, is somehow like a code for victory or something. So people are saying, oh, he's wearing a mask. That's JFK Jr. in the mask. And I'm like, even still, like, how did he shrink? All right, let's see what else we have here. Going through your comments. Two days until 11/4, anything on the menu? You know, one date that I find notable is 11/3. That's the date of the One World Trade Tower opening up 13 years after 9/11. Godzilla's birthday. 113 is the number of seconds before the Challenger explodes. And we've seen 113 and 311 equally represented in the body of predictive programming stuff, connected with Seattle and Ground Zero as a recurring theme. McDirty Works says, trust the plan. Yeah, I recall this. Trust the plan was, and there was actually an old operation, I think it was called Operation Trust, where you had a supposed insider leading the revolution. And it was all just a sting, a big honeypot. But what the Q people did was like they took these predictions, like next week Hillary Clinton's going to be arrested. I knew people who were into this stuff. I knew people who were deep into this belief system, and they said, okay, it didn't happen, but it's because it's going to happen next year on that date. So now they're watching anniversaries of Q postings and attempting to make predictions. It was a fascinating study in what you would call the Texas sharpshooter fallacy, where they could take any Trump tweet, the time it was posted, and correlate it with a Q drop. And then from that, extrapolate some wisdom that they would all retweet with a bunch of emojis. It was bad. But again, it was fascinating from the perspective of an alien anthropologist watching the emergence, the creation of the Q cult. And I knew people who were drawn into it, who got totally sucked in, even to the point of going to DC for the January 6th. And the people that I knew, I'm not going to name them, that went to January 6th to the speech, they went there with every intention that they were going to somehow stop the thing. Like, no, they weren't innocent. You know, Trump knew exactly what he was doing because that was the plot. That was the script. And the script was it was going to end as it did. Ashley Babbitt's not dead, by the way. Willie Bell says, Musk on Joe Rogan. Gosh, Musk is getting more lizard looking all the time. Yeah, I did see a screen cap of it. And I remember Candace Owens said that Musk, Peter Thiel, and Sam Altman are cyborgs powered by demonic AI, and they wouldn't bleed if you stabbed them. Completely normal thing to say. I mean, she has no guardrails. She's being sued for $1 billion for saying that the president of France's wife is a man, and she hasn't stopped. She hasn't backed down. Conscious Reality says he's literally been involved in everything on the world stage. I guess King would be next. Yeah, wasn't he involved in PayPal? Somebody tried to tell me that PayPal has some correlation with papal, like papacy. And I was like, what does that mean? Then I'm thinking, wait, Elon Musk, Elon, the first colonizer of Mars, in Mars, a technical tale. Well, one other thing I should add there is that the governing structure of Mars is templated off of Rome. It's got a pope. That's why we call him Pope Elon. Diana Southard says, but the Q drops had a code so the elite could order children from Wayfair inside furniture. Yeah, see, this is what you were seeing, is they were, and I went down these trails to see how they were arriving at this stuff. They said that Wayfair, which you buy cheap furniture from, actually refers to waif, like a lost child, and fare, like your ticket price. And so when you're paying Wayfair, you go to the back of the catalog and you see a filing cabinet. And the filing cabinet's name, for some reason, is like Tommy. And it's like $30,000. And so you buy it, and you're going to get some kidnapped kid named Tommy. And then people would go into the ad, and they would say, oh, this is the area code where he was kidnapped from. And they'd look for missing children in that area. And they'd say, you can buy this kid from this cabinet on Wayfair. It was pretty good. I mean, as far as like a conspiracy rabbit trail, it was sinister. It's pretty funny. It went on for a while. I think Ellen DeGeneres even was like a Wayfair promoter, which added credibility to it. But ultimately, what we're looking at, the explanation had to do with certain items. I don't know. I can't really quite explain it. What was the explanation? I don't think that they were putting children into furniture, though. Conscious Reality CD says the name Trump is even in the Bible as the book of Revelations, Trump 7. Oh, yeah, Trump, Pence. What was the other one? Obama, Biden, like Osama bin Laden. Trump, Pence. No, it's pretty much the case that when we're looking at the buildup of these characters, so we've been talking about Musk, but when we get into Trump, you've got your Biff Tannen, you got your King Koopa, you got Track Down, Charlie Coker, Caesar Catalina, a bit of Senator McLaughlin. You go down the list of all the various characters that directly represented Trump, like overtly, and then those that aren't completely overt. And we've got numerous, like the guy in Mickey 17. But if we look at all of these are just movies. But what about other sources for their narrative structure that they're overlaying? Like we were talking earlier about how mainstream media has essentially replaced religion and has adopted a lot of its aspects and constructs. So it makes sense that they freely borrow from religion as a source, from traditional myths. And I think what they have done is they have, in fact, grafted aspects of the Bible onto the world stage. This is like the flood myth is one thing I mentioned, but Trump, the head wound, Revelation 13, could be. I mean, one of the big things with Q, they said, is that JFK was going to come back. And it was a miracle because he survived a head wound. And that was their story until it happened to Trump. Have you watched the Dairy series, Missing Kids? I haven't. It's it though, right? It's about Stephen King. Yeah, the milk carton kids. Well, I don't know about the whole Wayfair thing, how they arrive at like naming these products after children or children's names and then hiking the price up. I'm not exactly sure. It's just some kind of thing in their catalog, but I haven't seen Welcome to Dairy, but I saw a trailer and it had that commercial with the cartoon, the black and white cartoon of the turtle doing the duck and cover dance. So it made me think about nukes. Donna Southhart says, like Gabby Petito and Persephone. Yeah, I actually saw that reflected also in the subway stabbing of Ierna Zaruski. How it's like or Zaruska, how it was on August 22nd. So we're entering into Virgo, and you have this image of the spring maiden and Pluto taking her into the underworld. The guy's got the red hoodie on. And so symbolism kind of aligns here. If you look at the idea of the subway and the underworld, and the idea of Persephone being kidnapped is tied in with, of course, Virgo, Persephone, but it's tied in with the transition into the fall. But we saw the same kind of pattern with Gabby Petito, who was also overtly represented as Virgo in the murals and otherwise. And she too went through the whole kidnapping thing. And of course, just the timing of it. We also saw a similar template with Diana, Princess Diana, and also with the Marilyn Monroe. These like female icons, these tragic deaths. The timing of them sometimes seem like they're actually replaying certain myths. So we're talking about the Bible stuff, but there's also other myths. Like there was something up with the stranded astronaut story from last year, where these two astronauts get stranded after riding the Calypso. And the Calypso capsule screws up. They get stuck up there for a long time. But in the story of the Odyssey, Calypso keeps Odysseus captive for years before he goes back. And I thought there might be some deeper significance to that story. Of course, right now as we speak, I think it's Christopher Nolan is working on a major production based on the Odyssey. So the Odyssey is going to come out next year. But anyway, I think it ties into the space Odyssey. So there's some kind of space Odyssey, Calypso. So we're just trying to figure out, well, what comes next in the Odyssey once Odysseus leaves Calypso? Well, that's where the sequence of events begins. And it starts with the incident with the Cyclops and the revenge from Poseidon. And of course, Poseidon has existed on the world stage in the form of this nuke that could wipe out a coastal city that Russia has. And the Poseidon would also correlate strongly with the Kraken, and even Godzilla, of course, Godzilla being a metaphor for the nuke. Donna Southhart says, Tomato Head astronaut. You know, I had to put that on the PSYOP card. So the two astronauts, it was the stranded astronauts. There's one particular occasion where he's doing a flip and his face turns red and the fat on his face moves towards the top of his skull. And there are people debating me online about this on X for months. It was Butch Wilmore and Suni Williams. They were stuck from June 5th to March 18th. It's 2024 to 2025. But yes, in one of the videos, his face turns red when he's upside down, and that actually shouldn't happen in space. And so we got into this big debate with someone for weeks where I'm screen capturing it, and I'm saying, are you denying that he's got a forehead vein? I'm like, oh, it's just a shadow. A shadow of what? It's a forehead vein. But he doesn't have it when he's vertical. Why does his neck get fatter? Why does he suddenly look like a sumo wrestler? And this guy had to concede, yeah, he looks like a sumo wrestler when he's upside down. But our point was because they're hanging on bungee cords. I mean, the astronauts are acting, they're LARPing, they're role playing. But to me, that right there, combined with her hair, Suni's hair, she's the one, Suni Williams, that they used to refer to as Medusa. And that's back when their hair was always standing up, like stiff like a broom. And what was strange about this is that when Kate Perry went to space, there was no G forces melting her face. Like when you're going up into space, your face is putty and you see your skull. It's not pretty, but no, she looked pretty. Then they're up there and spend their hair was like flat. It wasn't even levitating. Like they forgot the hairspray. They didn't have the hairspray effects when Kate Perry went to space. No, I don't believe she went to space. Jeranism does believe that. Rilo05 says, if Jupiter and Saturn have moons that you can see, it's logical to conclude that we are like them with our moon. Yeah, Kevin Morgan says, our moon doesn't revolve like most moons. Well, our moon supposedly revolves on its axis every 27 days. And we have a synchronous orbit. And it's tidally locked, which I think are mutually exclusive. I'm trying to wrap my head around it, because if it's rotating, and this would explain us always seeing its face, I'm sorry, but if it's rotating, at some point, it's not going to be facing us. Tidally locked makes more sense, but tidally locked kind of implies that it's not rotating. But either way, I mean, the moon is likely, I'm not really sure. Like in the Truman Show, that's the base. I don't think it's a hologram. I don't think it's a projection. It has to be physical in order to create the shadows that are created. But does that mean that the craters are from rocks hitting it? I don't know. I don't know if it's a good argument, but people have said that the big craters would have hit the Earth, not the moon. It's also been said that when the dinosaur extincting space rock, hit the Earth 66 million years ago, that it hit with such impact that part of the Earth, biomatter, water, and otherwise dinosaurs were squirted into orbit and onto the moon. So the moon has dinosaur bones. Yeah, Lily Bell, that's a good one. The astronauts never complain about space food every day, and their clothes always have clean, pressed, and matched, very well groomed. Okay, I've wondered about all the shaving that they do. I wondered about Peg, the captain who was there. Was it Peg Whitson, the one who was in space for 666 days? I was like, how did she get Botox in space and hair dye? Like, I want to see that footage. And then I wonder about the space food, because with the exception of Don Petit, the rest of them are like filling out their uniforms, like stuffed sausages. Some of these guys, I'm like, how are you staying so robust? Like, this is basically a camping trip. Like, are you not conserving your food? But yeah, they're definitely eating a lot of astronaut food to maintain that healthy body weight. That's the reason we were able to see through the special effects when Butch Wilmore flipped upside down. That's why it was so obvious, because you couldn't tell it's Suni Williams, who's pretty much desiccated. Kevin Morgan says, I'll see you on the dark side of the moon. See, I don't know if there is a dark side. I think it'd be the far side. Does anyone here believe in the moon landing? I think it was rear screen projection. I think it was done by Hollywood, basically. But I think it was 100% a psyop. But I don't believe it was done to trick the Russians and win the space war. But people can understand the rationale that they faked it to win a propaganda victory. So that makes a lot of sense. But I would extend it to say it was faked to win a propaganda victory against the masses, not merely against Russia, and that both sides were obviously in collusion. Sunkworks Extra says no space sickness on the ISS. Yeah, I've said for some time that I would be convinced that they were in space if I could see one of them vomiting. You couldn't fake that. And then you have the Chinese space station, and I had high expectations. I'm like, okay, they're not going to be stuck with 2005 era Final Cut Pro. I think they might have a better space station. And out comes the Chinese space station, and it's like they ordered it on Temu. Total garbage. And there's one point where they got a glass of water on the table next to them. Like, okay, that's kind of a problem. You're in space. How is that water in the cup just sitting there? Rilo05 says, I don't think we can leave this place. It's just not possible. Michael Lita says, JFK Jr., who would actually recognize him after all these years? Well, one of the last ditch efforts to like really promote the Q thing was that JFK has been wearing the Trump suit this whole time. How tiring is that? But when you really get down to it, if you really think about it, let's say it's true. Let's say it's true that there's been this operation, everybody's been deceived, and we're all being fooled. Like, you guys want to follow that? Like, you're following this fake dead president who's pretending to be your new president, and he's dropping hints covertly and making you look crazy. Like, at some point, it's like, why can't he just be honest? Like, you got a trickster god? Jorge Glockington says, India's space program is bad CGI. Yeah, I would say so. But you have to keep in mind, too, they will show you the animation of the landing because they can't show you the real thing. So it's important not to mistake the animation for what they're presenting as real. Most people will think it's real. So it's kind of funny. So, for example, the Artemis mission, it was like this 42-day mission where they sent rockets around the moon. And before they did it, they released this really cool CGI version of it. So you could watch the rocket go around the moon. But they had a notice on the bottom and it said, this is just an animation because we haven't gone there yet. And I was thinking they had to label this not real because the animation looks exactly like the supposedly real mission. So I think we reached this point where the fakery, the technology that they use for a lot of their fakery, specifically with regard to space, has been eclipsed by consumer level technology for faking stuff, simulating stuff, especially with generative AI. So if the average person with a laptop computer can outdo Kubrick's work on Apollo 11, what does it do for the believability of the CGI slop that NASA regularly dishes out? I mean, I look at Elon Musk's stuff and I'm just not impressed. A lot of those landings, none of it's really impressive to me. As far as the rockets, though, I'm not saying that they're not real. I'm saying that they launched something. It could just be a cylindrical blimp, which I have some theory. Oh, yeah. So we're talking about Musk's background. We should add something to this. I know it's dark. What we need to add to it is the Russian rocket pioneer Konstantin. He came up with these rigid airships. Anyway, he was known for cosmism and the idea of becoming a multi-planetary species. And when Musk started making these statements about becoming multi-planetary, he was actually kind of taking from this Russian rocket pioneer. And they had a book back in like 1906 called Red Star about perfecting communism on Mars. And then Earth scientists going up there, seeing how it works and deciding that this is the way to go. So it's kind of interesting too, if you remember when Grimes was talking about how the only reason that communism hasn't worked is because of greed and human error, but AI would perfect it. But anyway, my point here, when it comes to this Constantine character, is that's where a lot of Musk's ideas about going multi-planetary come from. But it kind of shows you, I think, the idea of space at that time was actually being sold as a new heaven. In fact, there's even discussions among these groups of rocket pioneers, space travel pioneers, about the idea of space and cosmism, implying that we look at it as essentially heaven, or as a form of progress, like aliens being introduced purposefully to replace angels, like spiritualizing it. They were already spiritualizing it. Like it is a religious thing. I think the space program isn't about taking you to some distant location way out there in space. I think it's ultimately about molding the space between your ears. It's about worldview. And this is why I think the idea, though, of Mars as a utopia comes from. We can establish Mars as the blueprint for the perfect society. We start over. We don't have to bring Republicans. And so they got this. And there was actually a show on Netflix called Mars, and it was a documentary that was merged with fiction. So here you have this fictional story of this mission to Mars, and it's a female-led expedition to find life on Mars. Musk is in it, and you have real people in it, so it's mixed with the documentary. So it's a documentary about the future Mars settlement. So it's like this hypothetical. So you have the female-led scientists searching for life. Well, then the males from Texas, and where did Musk and Bezos go? Texas. They wear cowboy hats. It's all performative because the space cowboy idea is what they're trying to eliminate. The idea of entrepreneurs, billionaires mining from space, taking capitalism into space. Like, no, they want us to go up there collectively as one, and we're not going to go up as capitalists led by Musk. So they've been setting this template. So in this documentary, the other group that goes to Mars are these males from Texas, and guess what they're doing? They're drilling for oil. So they're up there drilling for oil, and they create a Mars quake, and it kills the new life that the women found, and they have to save the males because they destroyed their tent when they created the Mars quake, trying to get oil because they're greedy. I mean, anyway, it's pretty ham-fisted, but you can kind of see here what they're doing is they're presenting us the idea that if we're going to achieve the perfect society, we can't let these guys be in control. And Mars is just this hypothetical situation where they can illustrate their system. Good One Day says, really creepy that the stuff is so apparently successful and entire reality introduced and accepted. Yeah, we're born into the programming. It's part of our education, indoctrination, and there isn't a platform for a perspective outside of it. So you would never arrive at the right conclusion if your perspective is always wrong. And the perspective includes all your presuppositions. So if one of your presuppositions is that everything on mainstream news is real, well, you're going to exist in a certain worldview. If yours is that alternative news is real and the mainstream is lying, well, then you're going into a slightly different paradigm. But as long as your perspective is rooted in mainstream or alternative, your mind is their playground. They're imposing a simulation over your perspectives, over your worldview. They're basically adding a bunch of stuff. Malware. Riley says, flat earthers need to watch amateur astronomers on YouTube. Okay, I think the idea of flat earthers is a misnomer. And this is why I never really badmouth them. It's like some people like, oh, they were wrong because Antarctica, they're all terrible. It's like, well, no. The people that you label flat earthers are media skeptics who took a special interest in NASA. But if you were to do a Venn diagram, you would find the same people looking at the moon landing sideways, thinking the ISS is a joke, are also noticing all the fake shootings and assassinations and other psyops. But they want to label them with this one as though there's some uniform conclusion that has been reached, which isn't really true. And I've said before, the reason why this channel is Infinite Plane Society is I was saying we're not going to start off with the presupposition of a complete model. It just sounds like a controlled dialectic, flat, round, flat, round. It's like, well, the real question should be, are we in a closed or open informational system? And that was my starting point, closed or open system. Is there more land? And I think that we have this perfect analogy with news media, closed versus open system. So off-world stage actually aligns with the idea of more land. That if you had more land, then it means that everyone is falsely contained in a smaller area that they falsely assume is the entirety of the world. So the idea of infinite plane is the outsider perspective, that if this is true, or if this model is false, then what is outside of it? And what we're looking at here is that our consensus worldview is provably bent. Good One Day says flat. It's a catch-all like Tartaria, but good enough to describe the concept. Well, I would like the Tartaria people who have their head in the mud to recognize that trying to uncover manipulated history starting 200 years ago and going back is only going to stay conjecture. But we have evidence that it's an ongoing process, and we're outnumbered. The mud flooders are in the millions. If you look at the video hits, or maybe hundreds of thousands, I don't know. But if we could get the mud flood content creators to look at contemporary fake history, well, now you can actually deconstruct how these things are made. You can actually find the producers of it, the directors. And I'm just saying that they put out mud flood and similar conspiracy theories as red herrings. Because, yeah, you're probably correct, but they put you into this innocuous area and they flood it with disinformation. So now instead of just talking about a big reset in history having been manufactured starting a couple hundred years ago, then they start adding on stuff like free energy, the parasites, the orphan trains, and it gets into new agey stuff. But I do agree with the premise here of that there could have been a world monopoly over news media, and they could have reset history. There are people who have theories about a missing 1,000 years. Yeah, it could very well be true. But I think what these theories do is they take the resource of researchers with the curiosity, the time, and the inclination, and they're putting them into a safe zone. Like, you're not going to disrupt the world stage in 2025 if you're looking at photographs of old cathedrals and wondering why there's no people in the photos. And the answer, I think, is long exposure times. The people aren't going to be sitting still long enough. Oh, Breek says the mud flood growth is suspicious to me. Yeah, well, the mud flood also ties in to the Q, the deep state, and the quote parasites are obviously referencing you know who. So it kind of fits in. The branding is bad, mud flood. I've heard some people call it anomalous soil deposit, but the idea is that there was a flood. But not only that there was a flood like 300 years ago that wiped everybody out, but that it was a deliberate weather weapon type thing. That we are, in fact, living on top of a buried civilization that was much more advanced, and that many of the structures that we are familiar with, from the Statue of Liberty to the Empire State Building, were already here and go down very deep. But I think it's an interesting theory. It's very science fiction-y, but I think it's a literal way of describing what could be figuratively put forth as a mud flood, as a reset, a worldview reset. And it was affected, the worldview reset was affected by hijacking worldview creation and centralizing it. I mean, who's behind Big Brother's viewfinder? Like, whose perspective are we seeing? Who's curating this whole thing? Conscious Reality says, I'm definitely not an NPC. So a non-playing character, like an extra in a movie, is someone who's part of the program by default, going with the program. The program would be the script as presented. And if you're stuck in Normieville, by definition, you're pretty much an NPC. The truthers, however, who use the term NPC to describe normies, are really just alt NPCs. What's up, Plain Decoded? Thanks for joining. Good One Day says, oh, and it's always now blame the Freemasons. That's the only place it goes. Freemason symbolism snooze. Yeah, I've given this a lot of thought. Charlie Kirk shot, and then 33 hours they catch the guy. And I've been trying to figure out, okay, what's the meaning of this? What's with the Masonic calling cards at every event? It's not like we don't have a point when we notice this stuff. So I'm thinking, well, maybe just like the second shooter, third shooter, fourth shooter, and alternative theories about Charlie Kirk, maybe they plant the occult stuff there. So those people who are paying attention are led down a rabbit trail, which doesn't subtract from the story. Or maybe, I mean, it could be there. It could just be contamination. Anything that diverts you from the fact that the things are staged and simulated is a diversion. That's what we should be hyper-focused on. That's what I'm focused on. Right now, I am focused on taking this concept of world stage, meta script, and the prefabrication of history. I'm working on putting it into a series of whiteboards that can be easily understood by anybody. Yeah, Lord Laney, good point. John Dee's letter to Mercator were also kind of weird about the 33-mile black rock at the center of the North Pole. Yeah, Mercator, John Dee, what's up with that? Yeah, the black magician with the scrying mirror, summoning angels of the apocalypse, advisor to the Queen, the first 007, hanging out with John Kelly, occasionally switching wives at the behest of angels, like really weird, convoluted stuff. But his ritual magic, like he's like if you think of like Aleister Crowley as like, this figure in the occult, like godfather of the occult, and he took all this content and popularized it. A lot of his stuff is straight from people like John Dee. Andrea says, the day the Earth stood still, 1951, the alien they created robots explains, in matters of aggression, we have given them absolute power over us. This power cannot be revoked, aka AI. I thought alien invasion AI could stand for alien invasion, that maybe the alien invasion, because if you get to the basics of it, whether it's green men or that future humans, what happens with the alien invasion is a higher intelligence emerges and we have to submit. Why wouldn't we? They have miracles. They have advanced tech. They're more sophisticated in every way. So of course we're going to listen to our space brothers when they come down. But the idea of a higher intelligence emerging would fundamentally change the world. So what's going to happen with AI? There's a point where AI, the way it functions, AI agents will be functionally smarter than most of the population. So are we not already experiencing the alien invasion that they've prepared us for? And maybe they use aliens as a metaphor to get us to think about these things or to acclimate us to it. Kevin Mooring says, tomorrow is the 33rd day of the shutdown. I certainly think that there's some agitation here with the Trump lavish parties. Someone said Caligula, and then you combine that with the redesigning of the White House, knocking down the East Wing, rebuilding the Lincoln bathroom. Like you see these instances of just conspicuous spending, just very overtly throwing it out there that there's all kinds of money. Meanwhile, during the month of Thanksgiving, they're cutting SNAP. Like, how is that not engineered to create a response? I saw Trump protesters today just driving around. I saw a group of them, carrying signs like Trump is a fascist. Kind of low tech. I mean, I think today memes and Twitter are more effective, but they're standing there and people honk the horns in support. Kevin Mooring says gaslighting is at an all-time high. Well, there's a relationship here with media in general, where if you see something that doesn't comport with what has been reported, you're supposed to default to what the media says. So people start off with, it's real until proven fake, as though the liar is going to tell on itself. I'm just going to treat this as though it's real, unless it's proven fake. By who? There's no entity out there, there's no agency that follows along with media and routinely shows where they're using psyops, propaganda, and influence operations. Like, it doesn't happen. We're the only ones, media critics are the only ones pointing it out, but there's no way we're holding them accountable. They're not going to like change. So the basic worldview you take, if your point of view is you're in the middle of the Truman Show, is you are gaslit, because by definition, what gaslighting does is it convinces the perceiver to put their perceptions second to their gaslighter, which in this case is the media. So to the extent that you trust them, you are gaslit. Bitsy56 says, South Park had stuff about renovating the East Wing, and then Melania was a ghost and it had the Shining vibe. South Park also has J.D. Vance trying to backstab Trump. See, that's getting good. Because South Park platformed Charlie Kirk. So nobody knew who he was. And then he's on South Park and he's this Cartman-esque character. Now everybody knows, so they can cheer when he dies. Lily Bell says, Satan's little season folk believe the alien invasion is being put in our consciousness, so we will come against what might be the return of Jesus. Wouldn't that be ironic? Like if the believers in Jesus are deceived into going to war against him with Space Force. Space Force was predicted in 1958's Trackdown, when the Trump figure came into town to build a wall to protect them from a cosmic threat. Sunkwork says, would love the new ballroom to look like the one from The Shining. Well, The Shining has some pretty well celebrated examples of Apollo 11 clues, suggesting that Kubrick was part of that. It also has 9/11 foreshadowing. And Trump is hardwired into 9/11. If you look at Back to the Future, Biff Tannen, that's Trump. But Back to the Future has plenty of references to 9/11. And it goes pretty deep. There's an entire rabbit trail of Back to the Future 9/11 connections that we're going to have to go through. But my point is that, like Charlie Kirk, Trump is a historic personage. He's a character in the meta script. The person that we see, assuming it's one person, is playing a role, like a reality TV show star. In fact, I would say that his success in reality TV made him perfect for this. But I think it was always in the script. Andrea says, the new ballroom has an obnoxious black and white checkered floor. What was up with the twin 88-foot flagpoles? Well, anyway, tomorrow is the 33rd day of the shutdown. I don't have any specific predictions. I'm kind of thinking that people are too complacent. Like, they'll get mad and they've got a steam valve on Twitter. They got a steam valve. The internet's a major steam valve. People feel like if they do it in the metaverse, then that's enough. That could be one of its main purposes. Like, the purpose of the internet is to give the masses a place to vent their frustration and feel like they've done something. No, what is today? Is today the 2nd or the 1st? Somebody says tomorrow's November the 3rd. I gotta get a calendar. I'm out of touch. I'm just right now. I'm kind of unleashed. I don't have any obligations or objectives right now, other than working on this particular project, history bending. The history benders. And the reason I want to put it out in this format is I want it to be challenged. I want someone to be able to not just hand wave it away, straw man it, but I want someone to take the steelman perspective and look at the evidence presented, and on that basis, attempt to refute it. Not that I'm challenging those people necessarily. I'm actually more interested in those who've already figured it out, because we're not the only ones who are noticing or who have noticed. But what we have to do is we have to have a shared framework. We have to have a point of agreement. Like, from the off-world stage perspective, we all agree that psyops happen. We all agree that mainstream entertainment reinforces the psyops. So there's a list of axioms that we all stand by. And I want to kind of fine tune this, because the more of us that stand by these, the more we can define our own platform separate from mainstream, where you have all these people who are waiting for the next Candace Owens drop, like she's going to bring you closer to the truth. No, all she's been doing this entire time is reinforcing this conclusion that was already there from the beginning, just teasing it out. Let me go through the comments. A lot of you are leaving comments on the YouTube videos, and I haven't been doing my responses. Monolithium, 33 milligrams. Appreciate you purchasing the book. The book is on Amazon. It's called Handbook for the Recently Deprogrammed, A Skeptic's Guide to the Theater of Psywar. Okay, we have Skydog603 says, number 7, deviations from standard protocol. Like, no crime scene tape, no EMTs. They just threw the body in the back of an SUV like a sack of potatoes, priceless. Sprightly Sprite says, I had seen that eye already. I'm glad someone else picked up on it. Now, I'm not sure what they're talking about. I'll have to get back to that one. Lord Laney says, Dwayne Roberts, inventor of the frozen burrito, has died and taken his exit off the stage at 88 like clouds on the rest. He looks suspiciously like Bill Gates. Why would the death of a burrito magnate be in my newsfeed? Yeah, I didn't know there were burrito magnates. Penguin Auto Hoaxer says, I didn't say it was CGI neck blood. I mean, the whole incident was CGI or AI. That's a scary proposition. Like, all the media you ever consumed your entire life was all fake. I think that's not really possible, but that might be the ideal. Like, that might be the future. Like, if we're at the point where people are going to be able to make movies with prompts, for example, if we're at that point where, I mean, I've seen videos that look so real, but they can't be. But, like, there's videos where people are making cakes that look just like their pets, and they bring their pets out and they chop up the cake in front of the pet, and the pets always freak out. Like, there's a whole series of these videos, and I'm like, wow, that looks super real. What are we going to do? What are we going to do when it gets to that point where nothing isn't unfakeable, where everything is fakeable? How do we reality test the claims? That's probably coming. That might even be the ideal future. Monolithium says, I'm about the same. My family thinks I'm nuts. If I told them about certain hoaxes, they would disown me. People are that polarized. Yeah, I don't ever impose MSM minus views on the mainstreamers. I just go down to where they are. I accept their paradigm. I don't disrupt their Truman shows. We only want the people who are looking for the exits to the Truman Show or who have stepped outside of it. And then we want to share a common framework so we can collectively engage in the great deconstruction. And I think we can do it with 10,000 of us. And what that means is, like, if you look at how the IPS think tank has served as a fake news wood chipper, okay, imagine having 10 times the number of people engaged in the systematic deconstruction of every PSYOP, going through all the connections between events to entertainment to directors to actors, and see what we come up with. That's kind of where I'm going with this. Okay, let's see here. Lots more comments. Guess how much 3I Atlas weighs, says Monolithium. 33 billion tons. Okay, so the Atlas thing weighs 33 billion tons. And I think I saw that number somewhere else. I'm pretty sure 33 billion showed up. Here it is. No, 33 trillion. In October 25, the 33 trillion figure now represents a past milestone. So we're past that. But anyway, the Atlas thing, 33 billion tons. Was that supposed to have happened already? Wasn't it already supposed to have deposited its aliens so they could instigate their takeover? The alien people are always falling for false prophecies. And there's actually a psychology behind it. Like, okay, so why do people who believe that the aliens are coming and then they experience a false prophecy that aliens don't come, why do they stick around the cult? Or why do people in a doomsday cult who predict the end of the world, why do they stick around if their doomsday prediction doesn't come true? It's called the gambler's fallacy. The gambler's fallacy believes that there's some kind of balance in the universe. So I lost 50 times, so the next time I'm more likely to win. The more times it loses, because it's going to have a balance. That's what they think. That the more, like, so you flip a quarter, heads, heads, heads. What are the odds it's going to hit heads next time? Well, some people say, I think it's going to go tails because it's already heads a lot of times. No, the odds are still 50-50. That doesn't change. But you have this sense of fairness or balance that gives you a bias that it's going to balance out in your favor if you stick with it. So gambler's fallacy keeps them locked on a losing streak, thinking that at some point it's going to have to turn, which it doesn't. It doesn't work that way. Probability, as Carl Sagan said, is clumpy. Like, it's not always perfect, although it does, in fact, at the end, it does, in fact, kind of match up. So when it comes to prophecies not coming true, it's pretty much irrelevant. In fact, the fewer times it comes true, the more they're disappointed, the harder the core will cling to it. We saw this with Q. The prophecy didn't come true this year, it'll be next year. It'll be next year. It'll be next year. And every year it doesn't come true, it's 1,000,000% likely to come true the next year. No. If it was a 1 in a billion chance last year, it's a 1 in a billion chance this year. Monolith said, visual art is often overlooked, but it's equally saturated with stuff. Most people know about Marina Abramovich and her overt themes, but a lesser artist is Matthew Barney, the Cremaster Cycle, Dance of Hiram Abiff. Everywhere you look, the whole thing looks like spaghetti. The whiteboard will help in reducing confusion. Yeah, the reason for the whiteboard is to put things on a timeline and then from that take out the common denominators and arrive at the source. So what year was the source material for this future event put into a book, put into a script? And then where was that script disseminated? And it may not be the full script. It could be as simple as include these 5 elements in your movie, and it becomes this uniform thing. I mean, if you look at one of the best examples is the predictive foreshadowing content leading up to 9/11, it was everywhere. I mean, there's so many examples. Some of it, and it goes back at least as far as the event was scheduled. And I think you can safely state that the movies foreshadowing the events would give an indicator of the timeline. So I would say that the Twin Towers were scripted to be pulled, to be destroyed before they were even built. Just like Charlie Kirk was scripted to be squibbed before he even took on that role. Because the actor that we know of was a toddler when that script likely emerged. And I'm not saying he was picked as a preschooler to be this character, but rather he was selected probably a couple of years before his billionaire backer came with his backstory and made it believable. Lily Bell says, AI videos of cats fighting bears to save babies are my favorite. Oh, those are AI? Because cats are protective. I'd like to think that if I was being attacked by a bear, a cat would, but they're so believable. That's the thing. And this is going to be the future. If it is, and somebody said the Charlie Kirk thing was all CGI. Like, no, it may as well be. It may as well be, but no. It's kind of outside the scope. And we talk about fakeability. You could literally fake anything. The question is scalability. Like the people who don't believe that koalas are real. Well, yeah, you could make an animatronic of an Ewok and put it in a zoo and trick some people. But could you have an Ewok faking industrial complex where every zoo has an Ewok? Probably not. You couldn't scale that up. So I would say that no, gorillas, chimpanzees, koalas, and panda bears exist. A panda bear will bite your foot off. Like those things are nasty. Like, yeah, they're playful, they're huggy, they roll around, but you catch one on a bad day. I've seen the damage they can do. There was someone who was arguing that there's no such thing as toucans, but these are parrots with plastic beaks glued on. And these claims are worth refuting because we don't want to get mixed in with the people who say birds are fake. So the birds are fake conspiracy theory, which was promoted by the media, which should tell you something, was a parody group mocking the people saying that Parkland was fake. And it was started by a Parkland school shooting survivor. And so we don't want to get mixed in with people who just call things fake with no substance behind their claims. So if you're going to say there's no such thing as a toucan, well, I think you should talk to a biologist and look at skeletons, look at anatomical specimens, look at time lapses of the birds being hatched, what they eat. And chances are you'll find plenty to substantiate the existence of one of these creatures, whatever they are. But the low information claim can't rightfully be considered skeptical. Like, I don't believe in koalas because I'm a skeptic. No, you're not a skeptic. A skeptic would have investigated all the available information. Your argument would be stemming from ignorance of that information, but making the statement that you don't know, so it's not known, basically. Like, I've never seen one. Like, that's not really a valid argument. Good One Day says, suspiciously not in the wild. Are you talking about panda bears? Because, okay, there's a few points here. So, for example, climates. There are only certain climates where you're going to have koalas. When it comes to pandas, I think that their nature has made them easy to hunt to near extermination, but the existence of panda bears has not been credibly refuted. And one of the other points I had made was, if there was even a 1 in a million chance this were true, then you could pretty much, I don't know how big it would get, but if you could be the person to prove that, you would be getting some kind of a prize. Like, you'd win the internet. Good One Day says Hans has some good points. Hans doesn't have any good points because his whole arguments come from incredulity, not real skepticism. And Hans is a confused person. If you don't know who Hans Wormhat is, but I don't think he's a shill or an agent. I just think he has a bad operating system and can't admit when he's wrong. He said that there's no chimpanzees, that chimpanzees are people in costumes. And his evidence are people in costumes dressed like pansies. So, yeah, this is my point. Yeah, gorillas are fakeable. Chimpanzees are fakeable, but they're not fakeable at scale. And if you go to a zoo and you watch how they act, you know pretty quick those aren't people in costumes. There was one of these things, I think it's called sun bears. They stand up and they have like dad bods. And so people saw this one sun bear standing up and waving, like, that's a man in a costume. It's actually not, because if you look at that clip, yeah, it looks like a person standing up. But 30 seconds later, it's crawling down the rock in a way that a human couldn't possibly move. But these claims that something is fake that don't have any substance other than personal incredulity can just be dismissed. I would invoke Christopher Hitchens' razor. That which is presented without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. So, like, I don't need to prove you wrong if you say something outlandish. Like, no, you have to be the one to provide that burden. And a lot of conspiracy theories get spread by people who are surreptitiously passing the burden of proof. Like, we had some guy in chat yesterday. He's like, I'm not saying I believe this. I'm just saying this is what David Icke said, and just listen to what he said. I'm like, well, no, you're actually kind of pushing the burden of proof, asking me to listen to this person. It's like, well, no, you should be able to present it. My favorite one was, of course, the space station is real. You could just go outside and look at it. Have you seen it? No. Well, of course, then, unicorns exist. I haven't seen it, but go look. Have you not spent time in the magical forest? You don't have to accept that. Like, if I really believed in it, then I should go to the magical forest, photograph a unicorn, and I should be showing you that photograph. And that's how I feel when people are telling me that they saw a spaceship, but they don't have a picture, but they tell me I can go see it. What's up, Pippi Langstroth? Thank you for joining. So we are here closing up on our third hour. We're just kind of getting ready. I'm looking at remote servers for running a 24/7 stream, video stream, multi-platform. We're talking YouTube, Twitch, DLive, Odyssey, all the audio streams. We're on We Love Radio. We're going to bring in more people into the fold. We need more people in the think tank. This is not an echo chamber. But we're just not platforming people who advocate for world stage perspectives. But we are aiming to aggregate people who can understand the off-world stage perspective. And that's going to happen when we have the numbers to create a self-aware, conscious, separatist movement. In other words, it has to be cognizant of itself. Like truthers know that they're red pillars. They don't know that they're propaganda mules, but they know that they're alternative media, that they're in that category. There isn't really a self-aware group of media skeptics of any significance. I mean, you got the IPS think tank, Fakeologist, John LeBon. These are like 3 think tanks focused on this. And there aren't very many of us. But our ideas are time-tested, solid, based on empirical research. And as I put in that book, Handbook for the Recently Deprogrammed, we have a framework to move forward here. And actually, I think offer a challenge. I'm talking like a little disruption in the media ecosystem. And what this represents, I think, is a challenge on philosophical grounds. And we'll see what happens. We'll see how they take it. But we need the numbers. because those people who are asking the deeper questions are still being guardrailed. Like, hey, Candace, what do you think about Charlie Kirk being still alive? We shouldn't be running it by one of these agents. We should be saying, if he's alive, then what? And just keep pulling at these threads. That's what we've been doing this whole time. We ask the hypothetical, we answer it, go a few steps further down, just kind of war game it out. What if? And it leads somewhere. And this is, again, systemic fakery. It's there for everybody to see. And what we're doing is we're exposing the architecture of mass deception. That's what I'm calling the great deconstruction. So I appreciate all your input on this. Again, this is all philosophical. We're not a political organization. We're not advocating for voting for some politician or any ideology, but we're really engaged in examining our individual and collective operating systems and the model of the world we live in and how this world has been curated for us. So we're therefore living, maybe not even fully consensually, within an optional paradigm, and nobody bothered to tell us. And part of this is the inbuilt susceptibility to lies as promoted by mainstream media propagandists. So it's driven by propaganda, it's covert. So when I suggest at times it could be a benevolent dictatorship, I don't know if that's even true, because it's inherently wrong and unethical. So how benevolent can it be? But maybe it's the best that can be done. I don't know. But I'm just interested here in what happens when a sufficient number of us are no longer buying into the duopoly and there are two perspectives, and we bring in this third perspective with some serious thought into what it means that fake events, engineered events, are regularly inserted into our consensus, and what does it mean over time? And then you look back, what has it done? Like, where has it put us? So I look forward to getting these answers, exploring these questions with all of you. If you want to get in the Discord, just go to ips.monster and scroll down. I have a list of useful links, and there's a link to get in the Discord server. There's 151 of us so far. All right, thanks for joining. We'll see you all in Discord or tomorrow, probably the same time. Again, I'm behind the scenes. I'm working on getting the 24/7 stream up. I don't think I need to wait for the office. I think there are some remote services where I can have the server somewhere else. I could operate OBS